I used the neurodivergence as a bit of a case study in the book because it just stood out to me as we're actually missing the point of this topic while simultaneously calling people typical. It's this othering. It felt like we were getting stuck in a game of I'm this, you're that. I talked about doing this research project at an alternative school where every person I interviewed talked to me, they had undiagnosed autism and they were gender nonconforming. And I thought, why is this so important that they're meeting a stranger and telling me about their labels? I didn't ask them these things. In our culture, it really became how many of these labels can I get? I saw this at my university. We see this at a lot of workplaces. How can we hire people based on we need this statistical check mark of people? And I'm going, this is like not good for democracy, I don't think. So we see the label mania going wild. I think it's an interesting thing when we look at the labeling. Does getting this diagnosis actually lead to an improved outcome? And I'd say if we looked at more people are diagnosed, more people are medicated than ever, more people see therapists, and still everything sucks, there's something not adding up here.
You must be some kind of therapist?
Today I'm speaking with Dr. Will Dobud. He is a social worker, researcher, and educator who has worked with adolescents and families in the United States, Australia, and Norway. He's the author of 3 books, including, most recently, Kids These Days. Is that in the screen? I can't tell. Kids These Days, Understanding and Supporting Youth Mental Health. Will, welcome to the podcast.
I'm really excited to chat with you today.
It's great to have you. This book is really thorough, and I can just recommend it right off the bat to parents, educators, therapists, anyone working with youth who wants a comprehensive overview of sort of the nature of the beast of what we're dealing with the challenge of raising especially adolescents, which is sort of my main population that I work with, although indirectly. So you and your co-author, Nevin Harper, have done a really great job here.
Thank you. That means a lot. We certainly did cover a lot of information, but our goal was really to leave parents and educators and therapists sort of fired up that we've been in some cases really missing the mark, and that getting it right doesn't have to be so hard.
Okay, that's an encouraging message. Maybe we can give a little sneak preview of where hopefully we'll go later with the conversation, which is how do we get it right? What advice do you have for parents and people working with youth?
The way I hear people talk about teenagers is that they're annoying, they're frustrating, they push back at things. And what that means is it makes us adults think, how do I combat this? And we get into this power struggle with kids, where really kind of setting up an environment where young people can be curious, where they can be their best. And what I mean by that is give them something to participate in. And that sort of starts with giving kids something to imitate. So I think really this notion of building a great connection with people is way more impactful than trying to fix them. So that's where I think the hopeful message of the book is if you kind of pay attention to how you're thinking about young people, you can see how your thinking can get you trapped in a corner. Why won't my kid do their homework? Well, whether or not your child does their homework is not your problem. That's your kid's problem, and they're going to have to deal with the consequence. So if we can avoid the power struggle through a good relationship while maintaining our adult responsibilities of food on the table, like consequences, those sort of things, it doesn't have to be so complicated. And that doesn't mean it's not hard, but I think it's we can kind of think ourselves into a trap of trying to fix this other person, where we also know that doesn't work in a marriage. You can't fix your siblings or your parents. And so I think if we pay attention to what we want to notice about our kids, like what do I not want to change about my child? And then you'll come up with a lot of cool things.
That's a really cool perspective, and it feels close to home with the parent coaching that I do. I often find myself saying to parents that there's such an important ramp up happening between 13 and 18. And really, by the time they're 13, you need to start thinking of them as someone who is on the way towards being on their own. And so whatever they can take on themselves, they should. And there's that mindset shift. I feel like especially around 13, if I can coach parents at that point in time, sometimes I see them years down the line when they really could have used that advice at the beginning of the teenage years. But just like you said, right? Like it's that allowing them to deal with natural consequences and understand the choices that they have and what they will live with through cause and effect, through learning their own way. That's such an important thing. And it starts with those little things when they're young that parents want to protect them from. And I talk about like the laundry, for instance, if you hand off the laundry to them, that's their responsibility now. They are going to forget. And there will be days that they don't have any clean underwear to wear to school. But letting them experience that is a surefire way for them to understand the importance of doing their laundry. Rescuing from the consequences isn't. So I love how practical your thought process is here. And you also talk about building on their strengths. There was something I highlighted where you had written about noticing what is going well and building on their strengths. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So I know that you talk a lot about culture on this podcast. And so like one of the things is every headline these days, and I have a lot of problems with Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, but it's like the kids today are dumber than ever before. The kids today are more fragile than ever before. The kids today, the mental health rates are out of control. And I sit there and I go, but what's the solution to this? Is it more mental health intervention? Is it like more kids are medicated than ever before, so this is not solving the problem? And so one of the things like building on the strengths is like teen pregnancy, the lowest it's been in decades. The amount of kids that are smoking or drinking, and I think there's, kids aren't really exploring the world as much as they used to either. There's problems both directions, but there's also really good things that are happening too. And so when I think about, building off what works, it's kind of this notion that we can get into, and this is like the title of the book, we can get into this trap of complaining about the kids, that they're disrespectful, like everything our parents said about us. We don't go outside, we're lazy, we don't read books as much as everybody else. And then we just become old enough to say the same thing about kids. And so we play into this role that there's this thing that's wrong with them, and then we start intervening in ways like in Australia where I am at the moment, banning social media for everybody under 16, but leaving it with, middle-aged people who are the most likely to take their own lives, statistically speaking. And so it's always kind of like one of the people I've been lucky to meet in this process, Dr. Chris Ferguson. It's all the intervening seems to always be about turning the screws on the kids, which is how he says it. Like we 20 years ago, everybody complained about violent video games leading to crime and school shootings, and crime for the most part is down, and violent video games sell more than ever, and they're more violent than ever before. So if you just pause for a second, the data will, what seems like a moral panic now will usually calm down later. But it is really hard when we're parenting and we don't want our kids, as you were saying, to suffer, to feel distressed. And then the headlines scare the crap out of us. This is what happened with putting missing children on milk cartons. You put one missing child on 10 million bottles, and it looked like 10 million children were missing. And the truth is, no stranger wants your child. For the most part, it's not the way it works. It's usually a family dispute, a family member, or in really horrific trafficking situations. But this what happens is we live in sort of a fear-based society, and when we're scared of our kids feeling some distress, what ends up happening is we're going to intervene way too much. And so instead, if you want to intervene, go for it. If you seek professional help, go for it. But just know, we as the parents or the educator also need to make sure that that mental health intervention is not tinkering with what makes that child awesome, because your child's going to get out of a hole by using what they already have. They're not going to be, they're not an empty vessel, as we wrote about, that needs to be filled up with this expert knowledge. If anything, with concept creep of therapy language leaving the counseling room, they already have all the knowledge. ChatGPT can give you all the knowledge, but they need to use what makes them awesome.
Well, you sound quite optimistic, and I think that's a good note to start on, and it'll be a good note to end on. But you were also very realistic about the problems kids are facing these days, and the ones unique to them, including, well, not to say that environmental chemicals just appeared yesterday, but you talk about the role of pollution, everything from heavy metals to endocrine disrupting chemicals in the environment. And you're willing in this book to ask the hard questions I think we should all be asking, like, to what extent do these neurotoxins and endocrine disruptors affect things like widespread gender identity issues? You're willing to go there. Um, you also tackle questions of overprotection and screens. You said that you disagree with Jonathan Haidt on some of this, which is a bold stance to take because he's so well respected, and and here you are coming on the scene, um, sharing a different perspective on that. I think there's definitely some overlap in your perspectives, but one difference I noticed was your chapter on screens. You explained what's particularly addictive and destructive about the endless scroll, the liking, the algorithm, and things like that. But rather than advocating for bans, you advocate for a more nuanced approach. And you explain, I think the terms you use are digital interference versus digital integration. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so digital interference. So we know that screens, like when our parents used to say, if you watch too much television, it's going to rot your brain. Well, there is some kind of truth to that about changes in the brain's alpha waves and all of this really complicated neuroscience stuff. So, for that chapter, we spoke with Dr. Mari Swingle. She actually lived an incredible life. She graduated her bachelor's degree at 18 years old and said, I'm going to move from Canada to France and become a model for a while. And then she came back and joined her father's psychotherapy clinic. And she was kind of on the beat faster than anybody about technology. So over 10 years ago, she wrote a book called iMinds, like iPhone, iMinds. And she talked about how the infinite scroll, that a lot of these apps and the technology is intentionally designed to keep us hooked. They want us to stay there. Now, at the same time, she said if you watch a video game developer, the way they play a game is very different than someone who's just playing Candy Crush and mindlessly doing nothing. Like their brain is actually turning on and becoming really active and using, these parts of the brain that are for critical thinking and solving problems. So the issue with the banning, in my perspective, and I also think prohibitionist universal approaches just never work. Um, what it's doing is sort of putting this blanket ban that no child is able to, uh, use this. So digital, there is a digital interference that happens. No teacher wants their student on their phone in the classroom. Nobody wants to have a conversation with a young person who just has a piece of metal in front of their face. At the same time, I think with good education, with good understanding of the technologies, I think most young people actually make really healthy decisions if we're involved in their life, and that can lead to a digital integration. I mean, in Australia, like during COVID, and I think this is like a key aspect of the book, that growing up when the rules change every few years is really hard and confusing for a lot of young people. So in Australia, like we were the most locked down country in the world during COVID. I could not cross a state line. I could not have more than 10 people at my house. It changed everything. And my kids were in high school and they were at home all the time. And as someone who ran my private practice out of, an office in the garden, I like, that was weird and challenging. But the narrative was, don't worry, you're digital natives. You have to learn how to go to school online. All your friends are going to be online. Don't worry about it. Everything is online. You're going to have your laptop. You can do the Zoom class, then write your essay on your laptop. And it's only like 3 years removed from that, and it's ed tech is the devil, ban all kids off social media, they can't have techno so it always seems to me it's only the adults, like, what the adults want to have happen, and I know that you can't give kids everything they'd want, they just eat candy all day, but it seems like this ever-moving goalpost. So I think what Mari Swingle wrote was a really hopeful piece about there can be harms to this technology, absolutely, and at the same time, there can be a lot of benefits from this technology. And so, I mean, we're seeing it with AI now. Everyone's freaking out about AI. But, I've been writing about this on my Substack. Like, like math teachers were scared of the calculator. Like, the world changes. New York City banned pinball for 30 years because they thought looked like a slot machine, acted like a slot machine, so we can't have everyone become a gambling addict. People were actually scared of the kaleidoscope in 1818. They thought people were walking into walls. They were so distracted, and no one would talk to each other anymore because of light, color, and mirrors. So, like, we've done all of this before. And so it's important, I think, that we don't just live in right now, that we can learn from history as well. Um, but at the same time, and I think you brought this up, like with the environmental toxins, how is it possible a country like Australia, where I am, and we could talk about American context on this too. Like in Australia, they wrote the federal government wrote the legislation to ban social media in 9 days. Like, what federal government does anything in 9 days? I'm American. It took 7 years to get my children a green card. Like, it's ridiculous, right? And but they still have, the state of New South Wales still covered up lead poisoning of Indigenous youth from a mining company in September of last year. So I'm sitting here going, why are we doing this thing when there's actually a real known harm to children, a known neurotoxin that we've banned from gasoline and paint. But if it finds out that a mining company, their product is leading to, higher rates of lead blood concentration levels, which there's no safe level of lead in your blood, how come no one can do anything about that? And so that's the part that didn't compute with Nevin and I especially with the phone things. I just think if all phones disappeared, we'd all still talk about teenagers the same way and try to ban something else that would make life easier with kids. That, I don't know, it kind of doesn't add up to me.
I am curious what you've noticed from your own experience that fuels your optimism that most kids would self-regulate pretty well with these things, 'cause it's my observation they don't seem to self-regulate very well. I often work with parents around, establishing boundaries with screen time, and common situation that gets a family into trouble is giving their kid a phone and what it would be, in my opinion, too young, and then, not setting the expectation from the beginning that this is going to be something that we are in charge of. So, the expectation is that it's at the kid's discretion and that they will have privacy, and then the parent has to walk it back. They have to take away privileges when they see that the kid isn't using those privileges, whereas I think it's much better from the beginning if when you do give your kid a phone, it's clear that nothing that happens on here is private, and, that, you're not just going to have unlimited access to the whole internet and every app whenever you want. It's up to us to determine what level of access is appropriate, and partly we're going to be looking to see how your mood and behavior are as cues as to whether this is good for you or not. Just like you would if if your daughter had a certain friend and every time she went to that friend's house, she came back in tears, there'd be a point where you're like, "I'm not sure that this friendship is working out for you." Um, Similarly, parents can see their kids' reactions to excessive screen time or to certain types of screen time and see that that's not beneficial for them, but then they end up, as you said, in a power struggle where what I observe is sort of the adultification of the kids, where the way that the parent talks to the kid is like they're trying to convince them this isn't good for you. And it's like, well, okay, but you're going to encounter teenage resistance. So what's the boundary? You're not gonna get anywhere if you expect a kid to understand or agree with your reasoning when you're coming in to tell them that something they want is off limits. So what's your boundary, versus a power struggle? I'm not sure how much you would agree or disagree with my perspective on this, because it seems like you've seen kids with a healthier relationship with technology than I have.
I totally agree that this is kind of about parenting. We didn't give our kids phones until like 16. That totally agrees with Jonathan Haidt's perspective, right? And we didn't really have a rule. It was just, this is our household. This is what we're doing here. So what kind of, I think, tends to happen is, I totally agree with you that there's not really any good education, but kids do things like turning off notifications. I think my phone is on more notifications. This is not something I've ever talked with my kids about, you know? And so there's things that, if we really educate and set up the boundaries from the start, and we could talk about boundaries in parenting, because boundaries seem like, to a lot of us, they can feel stale, frustrating. We have to enforce them. It means more work for the parent. But the truth is, if your kid usually breaks a rule, like stays out too late, they usually stay out. That's better than having no boundary. They still come home. Like, that's safer. So boundaries are really important. I actually totally agree with your perspective. I think the issue that I see, and with what Jonathan Haidt wrote, um, is it feels like the ban, federal government stepping in and banning something, or states doing phone-free schools, it feels like this symbolic gesture that is like, "Don't worry, we've got your back, adults. We'll solve this problem." Where, like, the phone-free school movement is an interesting one. Like, what classroom was like, "This is a phone classroom. Like, everybody bring your phones in." Like, there's no rule that was like, no school was like, "Yes, it's really great for everybody to have their phones." So something changed where teachers didn't feel they had the control of their classroom, the power over their classroom to enforce, "Hey, put that down or you're gonna have detention. You have to like, and, I'm not like that high school teacher. I don't know what that's like, but something changed where it became really permissive to allow all of these things, where really what Nevin and I wanted, and as people, we joke about this, and like, we don't like shooting on people. Like, I don't like telling other people what to do. I don't like being told what to do. At the same time, I want people to feel empowered to do what they think is right, and not feel like they're told what to do. So I absolutely 100% agree with you that if you're at the time where you're thinking, "I'm going to give my kid a phone and a smartphone, and that has access to all these apps and all this way too much information," that you do need to set your kid up for success. That's the digital integration. And I think that also starts with giving kids something to imitate. Like, I saw this video the other day, because I've used this example before. If you're on an airplane and you see the safety briefing, every person on the plane is on their phone. Everybody. And I watched this video of, there was a plane incident and everybody had to evacuate the plane, and everybody brought their baggage off the plane, which is like rule one of like, "Hey, don't clog this up. You need to leave the plane." And there was a fire and everybody was coming off with all of their luggage. And I'm going, what are we giving them to imitate? So if we're on our phone all the time, it's kind of ironic to say something that to the kid that doesn't add up. So I think it starts with the adults.
The imitation piece is huge. I had a family consulting me about a behavioral issue recently, and they said it's so hard to get our kid to get ready for bed in a timely manner because he's so distracted, and he always wants to do whatever stepdad is doing. So, I mean, this might sound obvious when I put it this way, but I said, "So then shouldn't stepdad be brushing his teeth when you need the boy to brush his teeth?" That would make sense, right? If the boy's gonna imitate the stepdad, but it's hard sometimes to remember how impressionable these kids are and how much our example means, because then it's like we feel guilty, right? Like, I'm not always behaving in a way that I would want my kids to imitate. I'm not always present in the moment. But you argue, about well, I'm not sure actually exactly what you would argue about phone-free schools. I think you're right that that teachers have lost control of classrooms, and I did hear a lot of these stories of just everyone's on their phone in the classroom, the teacher can't control anything, and even when it comes to the in-betweens, I think those moments are really important, the moments in the hallway, recess, lunch, um, and it seems to me like in schools where they don't have strict bans, that there's kind of this, tragedy of the commons issue happening where, if, let's say, 50% or more of the students have phones and they start to get them out on their break, then it feels like everyone should have their phones out, and it decreases the sort of forced pressure to just socialize and be present with the kids around you. So now they're not socializing, or they're only socializing through their phones, showing each other things, not making eye contact. And that seems like a real problem to me, so I can understand why schools would want to be phone free, but it sounds like you wouldn't support that.
Well, I think, as someone who has worked outdoors with kids, like, the biggest barrier, well, a barrier to engaging in the outdoors is your phone, right? Like, it's annoying. It's like, "Hey, we're out in this beautiful natural area, like, let's just watch this." But I think that lands on me as the therapist to engage the person in that process. So, the phone is a challenge, but it also is a challenge for me to be more present, to be more engaging, maybe have some more charisma or something. And as someone who has worked in high schools, like, the most boring place in a high school is the teacher's lounge. Like, it's like soul destroying to be there, where everyone's on their phone, not talking. They're exhausted, they're overworked. There's too many kids in their classroom. And so the phone is almost like a pacifier, where really working with kids is like, we have to be really present and energized and kind of, discuss why learning Shakespeare is interesting. Like, I found high school soul destroying. If I had a phone, I would sit there the whole time on the phone, but I was engaged in. I really didn't even learn how to be a student until I started studying psychology and social work, where I went, "Oh my gosh, this is actually interesting. I like this stuff." Um, and, went on to do a PhD and write stuff, and I love writing, but I didn't learn any of that from high school. Like, so I think there's this kind of concept, and it's almost like a nostalgia bias, that school was better when I went to school. Like, if we use this kind of the phone-free school lunch, and I'm 100%, I'll get to where I'm 100% with you as well. Like, teachers would ban doodling in the classroom if they could, or like that we talk to friends and pass notes, like all of these things. But what has happened in school is we've simultaneously kind of killed recess. Like, there's no risk on the playground anymore. The playgrounds are safer than they've ever been. You know, Maryland, where I'm from, the public school system in my county has banned baseball, football, and one person on the monkey bars at a time. All of these rules, and I'm sitting there going, "What adult went to college, got a teaching degree, and then is like, you know what I want to do with the rest of my career? I want to police, tag on the playground." So we've simultaneously kind of made school as, and talking, not talking about education, like the schooling system. We've created this schooling system that really only works for kids that fit in with the system. And so if you're someone who doesn't have a good social network at school, what are you going to do in during recess or in between class times when you can zone out on your device, or you're not going to sit there and talk to nobody. So this idea that if we just remove the phones, everything at school will be solved, I don't know if that, I think there's a way bigger problem with school. And Peter Gray, I believe he's a psychologist from Harvard, he writes about play and things like that, that you can actually have a way bigger correlation to changes in school curriculum in 2010 to anything that's a mental health crisis than the phones. And so there's this, I just think, and never in my life did I think I'd be someone talking about phones or social media. It actually doesn't interest me that much. It's mostly youth development that I'm really fascinated about. But what I see happening is this notion that once this thing is gone, school will be excellent, where the truth is school has kind of never been excellent. So if we look at youth mental health, it's deteriorated. Youth anxiety has risen since the 1950s. I think the 1980s were suicide was as high in the 80s as it is today. So what was going on in the 80s? Well, family systems, divorce was more common, so we had more family separation. You also have the Cold War, so everyone's scared of getting, bombed, and it's terrifying. And then 2010, you have this again another spike that seems to slowly be going down since COVID. Um, but the part I agree with you is I want kids playing and having fun, and I think most kids in the right environment will choose that. And I'm speaking, this is my own nostalgia, but when I've run expeditions with young people, this is why I went to Norway, most of my work in the outdoors, like sitting around and having dinner together around a fire is like, it's such a wonderful experience and no one's on their phone. And so if you're having an engaging conversation, people will usually put their phone down. So again, it's what have we given young people to participate in that they'd rather be on their phone? So that's sort of where I think from the how we can think about it as adults.
I'm trying to figure out exactly where to draw the lines around what you're saying and where we agree and disagree because I don't want to misinterpret your point. I think there's a lens through which I can hear what you're saying where it's essentially okay, the adults in a kid's life, including teachers, have to compete with this, endless dopamine machine over here to just be more interesting, right? If they're drawn to all the endless stimuli, it's because you're not interesting enough. You need to be more interesting, and there's a degree to which, well, we'll never be able to compete because it's a completely different type of experience. Um, I don't I certainly wouldn't take the stance that, phones are the only thing wrong with schools. I agree with you that I think a lot of how public education is run is total garbage. It's not experience-based. It doesn't prepare kids for the real world. I if anything, it gives an inflated sense of their capabilities to the students who are the most academic, and then they're in for a harsh reality when those aren't the skills that are really needed in the real world, and, um, I mean, there's we could do a massive overhaul, so I wanna make sure I'm not misunderstanding you to say that, that we just need to compete with the phones for kids' attention and be more interesting.
Yeah, I think this just gets back to boundaries. This is where I really agree with you. Like I remember when I used to like, for instance, I worked in Alaska for a while, and we were taking young people on expeditions as an alternative for them going to jail. And these were really, kids from rural, remote communities. And I'd always say, listen, I'm going to stub my toe and I'm going to say shit when that happens or a worse word. And so I don't care about swearing. But what's going to happen is swearing will eventually get out of control while we're all together because we're just going to start using it. And what happens is if like swearing is fine, but sometimes if you swear too much, you sound like an idiot. So can we just see what happens? And in a few days, if swearing gets out of hand, can we all work on that together? And everybody goes, sure. Where if I said no swearing, I've got no buy-in. No, there's no, are we all agreeing to this? Even though I want people to speak politely to each other. And then I would say, but I am going to say, no, no, like racism stuff. Like, I don't want to hear that stuff. And they go, okay. And then eventually something happens. They get angry with each other. They call each other names. And then you go, hey, can we go back to what we talked about here? So I think it's kind of, you can do any banning that you want. I'd like any school to do whatever they want. I mean, I'm good friends with people. They run a nature school in New South Wales, Australia. It's amazing. There's no phones there. It's probably a rule. I don't lose sleep about it, but I like the boundary to be important to the context of why it's there. And so when I see, and I think this is kind of the most important thing I took away from writing this book, that when I hear the way the language is, like we have to protect the kids. Like here, when I first read The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt's book, The thing that stood out to me is he proposes 4 norms, and the norms are something like, no social media till you're 16, no smartphone till you're 16, and, no phone at all till you're 12, something like that. And then unstructured play, no adult interference. So the 4 norms are like 1, adult interference, 2, adult interference, 3, adult interference, 4, no adult interference. And I just thought this is like a really odd way to conceptualize what you're proposing here. And not to mention the research and you know, we don't have to get into that. But the thing I think where I really agree with you is I want the school to be making a informed, like when Montgomery County Public Schools say no baseball on the playground, I'm sitting there going, why? And it's just about, what if somebody gets hurt? Someone got hurt playing baseball last year. Well, someone's going to get hurt on some other playground equipment, and then we'll make playgrounds even more boring than they've ever been. So I think if a school wants to go down the phone-free school thing, and I think, sure, go for it. I think also think about how is it that we're talking to kids. I put out a video just the other week that it was a mainstream news thing in Australia, and it's a digital detox boot camp run by Army veterans here in Australia. And so parents are sending their kids, and they're basically going through this 9-day pseudo boot camp, and it's all about technology, right? And that's the focus. And the person on the news said, these kids arrive and they're a shell of a person. And I just went, how are you going to treat a child that you believe is a shell of a person? Like right off the bat, you're starting at, I have to fix you and I have to fill up this empty shell with what I think is important. And so I think creating the environment, and if that involves the boundary of phone-free schools, go for it. But I think it's just a cautionary tale of, if we do this because we think there's something wrong with kids, it won't lead us to the utopia that we think it will.
It's hard for parents or busy adults around a kid to put themselves in a kid's shoes, but sometimes it makes all the difference if you can just take a few moments to mentally put yourself where they are. I saw a really beautiful example of this recently. So, my husband and I were out for a walk, and there was a grandfather with his maybe 2-year-old granddaughter outside. And at one point, they were just parked in the middle of the sidewalk while the little girl, who at that point she'd been pushing around a baby stroller, a little kid-sized baby stroller full of her stuffed animals, and they were stopped and her stroller was parked and she was chasing leaves down the sidewalk. They were blowing in the wind. And she was filled with delight. And as we passed him, he basically he greeted us and he narrated her experience to us. He said, "We're noticing the effects of wind," or something like that. And I was like, "Great theory of mind, Grandpa. That's exactly what's happening. She's 2 years old. Wind is a total novelty. The fact that this leaf is moving because of this invisible force is so exciting to her right now. And you're doing a great job of putting yourself in her shoes. You're patient, you're totally present, like she's having the time of her life." And you can do that with a 2-year-old. They're gonna be fascinated by something observable in the material world, and you can do that with a child of any age. It gets a little bit more complicated as they get older, but this is where a lot of power struggles, I think, come from. I notice in parent coaching is that the parent forgets to figure out, where is my child's attention, before they go and ask that kid to put their attention somewhere else. And you can end up in these oppositional dynamics. And so sometimes the solution is really as simple as just noticing or coming alongside them, or, "Hey, what are you doing?" But not in an accusatory way, not like, "Are you supposed to be doing that?" But literally, "What are you working on?" Um, and that can help, especially with the kids who have difficulty transitioning too, because sometimes they're oppositional. They're not obeying your instructions in the very moment. Well, did you think about where their mind was at? Especially considering these kids are so overscheduled. They have so many transitions in rapid succession. Then meanwhile, you have all of these kids who are somewhat autistic, diagnosed or not, and we can actually I think we should talk about that next because you have some really great things to say about that in the book. But kids who may already struggle with transitions and need longer stretches of time for their attention to just naturally go wherever they want it to go, and they're already not getting enough of that.
Well, we were finishing writing the book. I started down a really deep rabbit hole about not only American philosophy, but the founding of our professions of social work, of psychology. And as an outdoor person, and I did my doctoral research was a bit about this, but about kind of experiential learning. And I started noticing that in some cases we get this idea sort of, I don't want to say wrong about experiential learning, but it's kind of become synonymous with activity. Like, what activity are you doing? What experiential activity? But experiential was really like this, John Dewey's the most well-regarded person on this topic, but John Dewey was a mentee of William James, like famous Harvard psychologist, oversaw the first psychology PhD in America, had the first psychology experiential lab at Harvard in the world. Like, he was remarkable, and his ideas were things like stream of consciousness. Like, this is a William James idea that your consciousness is going to change based on what you're experiencing in the world. So if you read a book, and let's say the book is brilliant, but you say that book is boring, there's something to learn about this. Like, what is this about me that I'm experiencing this as boring, but someone else might experience this as really riveting. My wife loves reading fiction. I only read nonfiction. Like, what is different about us that we can learn about who we are? So I love this idea of chasing the leaves and someone saying this is the wind, because now the child is experiencing wind, where a lot of schooling today is very passive, which this is the part that is very interesting to me as a therapist. Like, the manualizing of therapies. Like, William James and Jane Addams and John Dewey, like the gurus of the early 1900s, psychology, social work, and education, they would hate this idea. Like, Dewey wrote about a crowded curriculum. There's too many things to learn, and kids aren't getting the chance to experience things, and they should be solving problems together, and an open source kind of learning. And so teachers all learn this stuff. Therapists, we all learn. It's all the relationship, it's hope and expectancy, and it's a sense of, a shared interest in the problems that we're solving, or the work we're doing together. But then still, everything we do is dictated by the insurance company. It's dictated by people who aren't therapists, who are telling us what to do. So there's this kind of, and I think this is the undertone of the whole book, like, if we kind of sit around, and this is where we can get into, like, I think is a good segue into autism as well. Like, if we sit around and wait for, like, like they just announced that, and this is early 2026, it was just announced there's going to be a new DSM, and it's going to be way better than the last DSM. But everyone who's writing this new DSM all have financial interests with the pharmaceutical companies. And so it's like, why are we even caring about it? Like, and I know we all have to make money, and that's the world we live in. It's kind of this irony that what we're trained to do and then the system we're forced to work in seem like two totally different worlds. So with school, I think if we really revisited everything you just said, which is, can they have more time together, instead of a bell rings, you sit down in rows in a seat in a classroom. The bell rings, you stand up, you walk next door, sit down, bell rings, stand up, go to the next. Where it's like kind of antithetical to everything we know about childhood. And let me say something going back to the early 1900s. Most children in the early 1900s worked in factories, right? And so most kids did not go to high school. And if you really want to think about high school being important, like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, none of these people went to high school. I think Thomas Jefferson owned his plantation from 12 years old. I think he was the manager of like, there was a different way we viewed kids back in the day. Not that owning a plantation is cool. I'm not advocating for that. What has changed is it was everyone needs to go to school. This will be really important. And I'm not anti this idea. But Jane Addams, when she won, she was the first American woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And she was also, when she died in the 30s, she was the most famous woman in America that we hardly talk about anymore. She created my profession of social work, um, you know, along with other people, of course. But one of the things she did was she fought tirelessly to get kids out of factories. And it wasn't because of an ethical issue. It was, this is not good for the growing body to do nothing. To be this, she wrote a book in 1909 called The Spirit of Youth, where she went through in Chicago many of the kids that wound up in the juvenile courts. And she's like, all of them are stuck in factories all day. What would you do on the weekend? You'd go to the train tracks and hop on a train and go on an adventure, you know? So if we're crushing the spirit of youth, it's no wonder that they're pushing back. So I found it interesting. And then, like, reading Eric Erikson and the developmental stages, Eric Erikson has a great quote. I think it's in 1960, where he says, we learned how to stop stunting the growing body by getting them out of factories. Now we have to stop like stunting the spirit of youth because of our own adult anxiety. And so we see this a lot where it's trying to fit kids into this box. And so I think that, like, there's stuff to look at historically as to how these really radical thinkers created how they saw things, and then how we still put up with the system staying exactly that the status quo is okay. I mean, I work at a university. I'll tell you, trying to get anything going, like they say, Will, you've written about outdoor therapy, create an elective. Do you know how long that process is? I have to get that approved by like 9 different subcommittees. I was like, that sounds like a huge pain in the ass. Like, they want you to make a change, but secretly they don't want any change to happen. And so, because that's hard, it's hard to change things. But I think many people, if they revisit not only their own youth and how they thought about themselves as a teenager, but also if someone got into therapy, got into being an educator, why you got into it, I think that can keep you motivated to keep kind of bucking against the system that's been put in place.
Your trans-identified kid won't listen to reason, because reason isn't what they need right now. They need a parent who knows how to communicate in an empathic yet strategic manner. ROGD Repair gives you over 120 lessons in the psychology and communication tools that actually work when normal parenting doesn't. Plus, RepairBot, your 24/7 AI coach trained on my entire body of work, ready to help you navigate tough moments in real time. Visit rogdrepair.com and use code SOMETHERAPIST2026 to take half off your first month. All right, let's talk about autism. We flagged that. I appreciate the way that you address this, because early in the book you acknowledge that we have a lot more environmental toxins that could have something to do with rising rates of, well, mental conditions that are downstream of things like heavy metal exposure, phthalates, things like that. So you look at the rising rates of autism, what they might have to do with things like that. But you also talk about how the term neurodivergence gets misused, and the issue of secondary gain, identity politics, and youth over-identifying with their mental illness.
Neurodiversity is a really interesting one. And actually, one of my colleagues, a feminist scholar, sent me this article about it, and it was a few years ago, and I just went, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe, like, mainstream we're getting this so backwards." So, like, the historical perspective was, there's an honors thesis from the mid '90s written by Judy Singer, an Australian sociologist, who wrote that this concept of neurodiversity is a place, it's a setting. Like, your brain is different to my brain. We're having a conversation, and that's neurodiversity. So it was actually this kind of movement to move beyond labeling, and so it was really inspired by a lot of uh, feminism and gay rights activism, that how can we move beyond having to just be put in this box, if I happen to have autism. And so the concept was really, um, neurodiversity being that your brain and your neurological makeup is as unique as your fingerprint. So everybody has this unique neurological makeup. So that way we can think of a classroom or a workplace that's open to everybody. Like, and speaking from like disability activism, like every elevator has braille on it. Like, how many people can read braille? Like, I would guess way less than 1% of, but you do that so that any person can ride the elevator. So it brings everybody in no matter what, and you don't really have to get into it. You can just go, yeah, you're come ride this elevator. So what happened with neurodiversity is it turned into this movement of, are you neurodivergent or are you neurotypical? And it turned into kind of a power move one way or the other. And so this rise of, I'm neurodivergent, meaning I'm more kind of neurodiverse than you are. And so I think maybe this naturally happens with things. Humans, we love classifying and categorizing things. But if you lined up all 8 billion people in the world, you'd never find the line where divergence starts. Same way, if you lined up people by color, lightest to darkest, you wouldn't find where black starts. It's a odd sort of way to go about things, this endless need to classify things. What we saw, and we've seen this over the last 10 years, was, and I think this is one of the things, social media being like WebMD for mental health, like this played a big part in this, where you had fidget spinners and then you had toys designed for your, divergence, if you will, like actually marketed towards something. So the way that we went about this, which I thought was kind of challenging and maybe risks being a little too academic and nerdy in some parts, was, if you asked me, why has rates of autism gone from 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 to like 1 in 38, depending on who you ask, something like that? I would say, well, the DSM-3 came out and they opened it up for everybody. And so everyone can fit into this sort of thing. And then what happened as well is, if you ask a toxins researcher to what's going on, they're going, well, we're all got all these chemicals in us that are all linked to social behavioral concerns, attention related issues, especially if you look at the levels of these things in utero. Um, and so it was all, for them, it's no duh, this is all linked. But it's really challenging in today's political, social, cultural climate has changed a bit. But I pull this video of the president talking about, Tylenol and autism. And immediately everyone's like, this is crazy. It's just because the DSM opened it for everyone. That's why well, that's also not cool that everybody gets labeled all the time. That also doesn't really sound like, oh, that's a great, what does it say about the diagnostics criteria if you can just open it up and then everybody can get it? So the other thing, and we didn't write about this in the book, and I wish we did, in Australia in like the 2010s, they introduced new funding for people that were diagnosed with autism. And so what we saw is this spike of diagnosing people because all the workers got more money. Like, that also changed things. So there's all different ways we can kind of look at it from different angles. But what I used the neurodivergence as a bit of a case study in the book, because it just stood out to me as we're actually missing the point of this topic while simultaneously calling people typical, which is like not cool as well. Like, it's this othering that we kind of had a problem with, that everybody, it felt like we were getting stuck in a game of, I'm this, you're that. And before we hit record, I talked about doing this research project at an alternative school where every person I interviewed talked to me. They had undiagnosed autism, and they were gender nonconforming. And I thought, to myself, I thought, why is this so important that they're meeting a stranger and telling me about their labels? Like, I didn't ask them these things. It just, and so it became sort of in our culture, it really became this sort of, how many of these labels can I get? And then I saw this at my university. We see this around a lot of workplaces. How can we hire people based on, we need this, statistical check mark of people? And I'm going, this is kind of not how, this is like not good for democracy, I don't think. So that sort of was our view of this. So we see the label mania um, going wild, and we shared a study that, as children, I think it was a study of a few hundred kids in California, and they gave them a mental health symptomology checklist and asked them, "Do you self-identify as having a mental disorder?" And those that said yes, 2 years later, when they did the post the survey at the end of the study, 2 years later, those who dropped the label had the biggest increase in self-esteem. So we're kind of throwing around these labels that might actually not be helping with, like, protective factors. And not to say, like, self-esteem is everything. That hype kinda came and went too. But it's I think it's an interesting thing when we look at the labeling. Like, does getting this diagnosis actually lead to an improved outcome? And I'd say, if we looked at, more people are diagnosed, more people are medicated than ever, more people see therapists, and still everything sucks, there's something not adding up here.
And then you mix in identity politics, the victimhood narratives, the secondary gain. You give this example of a girl who has labeled herself as having borderline personality disorder, and that you showed her the list of traits and said, "I don't think you meet these traits." And she was saying, "Oh, but my I have a social media presence based around this label." And that gets so dangerous. In this case, you were describing a teenager, and you went on to explain that, there's a lot of disagreement in our field about whether teenagers should be given personality disorder diagnoses at all. I personally believe that traits of potential emerging personality disorders should be noted as traits in a patient's chart so that that can be monitored and, the pattern can be recognized over time. But it's really dangerous to give someone that label so early on when there are so many people who would meet criteria for borderline personality disorder at 16 because they're 16 and they can still grow out of it, right? But what happens if they get caught up in the system with that label? And what happens if they overly internalize that label? When is a label helpful for them to recognize, "Oh, that's my borderline," as you would with something like narrative therapy, which you speak of highly, where externalizing the problem, "Oh, that's my borderline. That's not me. So I have an independent sense of self and that's my disorder acting up." Like, that can be helpful. But just as much, there is the getting sympathy, building an identity on this thing, and and then when it comes to something like autism, I just throw my hands up in the air because I have so many people coming to me saying that their kid is autistic or was considered for an autism diagnosis, or that they've gotten them evaluated or they haven't. But I really don't know whether we're looking at the more extreme end of the spectrum where, for example, um, a high schooler has to be repeatedly instructed not to touch their private parts in public. That's a pretty severe form of autism there, and that's, that's going to warrant a different approach than a kid who's socially awkward. And how much does that have to do with isolation during the pandemic and spending a lot of time online and the shortage of experience, which you also write about? Let me flag that. Um, and so much of what I think benefits the kids who are right on that cusp of, like, maybe they qualify, maybe they don't, for that autism spectrum diagnosis, is it seems to me like they need more co-regulation. They need more quality time, more mirroring, more um, of that narration of their inner experience. "Oh, we're watching leaves and how they move in the wind." It's like it seems like the things that benefit any youth or any therapy patient, they just need more of those things to help scaffold their brain and social development in the right direction. That's my personal opinion on what they need. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think not that we have to go back to talking about phones or social media, but I think like I guess this is just a lot of me being kind of an overthinker of things. I think, okay, you've got this diagnosis, now what? And the truth is, now what? You have to do the exact things that you just said. Like, so what are we going to do different? Like, how is this diagnosis going to help us? How can we move beyond just a word? And you're absolutely right. We need that co-regulation and saying the inside part out loud that we can make meaning and reflect on our experience and be in relationship with other people. So I think where what we saw with the reason we lump this into identity politics is it's as if everybody that's a red person thinks exactly the same, and everyone who's a blue person thinks exactly the same. Where it's like, this is as adults, we have to embrace that this is messy and complicated. And if we're going to, if we're going to say autism spectrum disorder, that there's this like as you were saying, there's like nonverbal and that in the teenage years can become quite violent. Like you have an extreme thing that we're kind of what I saw, especially in Australia, when all this funding came for working with providing social supports and therapy for young people, like the amount of, and now they're scaling it back because they spent too much money, and it's like, but it's things come and go in waves, and so in like cultural waves, and so what what I saw was, and we wrote about this later in the book, and I think this is sort of, I think this captures my thinking on it, like the rise of students requiring accommodations in the classroom, especially at universities. It's I would not want my classroom, and I know that talking about this can immediately be like, "Oh, what an asshole." But I have nothing here nor there, like, if a student has accommodation, I'll do it. But there's also, like, is this an opportunity where you can learn the subject material you have to learn and learn about yourself and the way that you learn and the way, because I know when I was diagnosed with ADHD, again, this is a term that does well, my wife probably thinks about it more than I do, but, like, because 'cause I'm annoying to live with, but I know that I can get hyper focused. Like, how have I written books? Like, that all happens at 1 in the morning, you know? That doesn't happen at 9 AM, wake up, I should probably write this book right now. That's just me getting my inside ideas out on paper, you know? Um, and so I also have a job with a lot of flexibility. So I'm in the right environment where I'm kinda left alone to do my own thing. I work with a great team of people. I get to write research projects on whatever I want to, and I learn about new things whenever, whatever. I've got this kind of freedom that high school didn't give me. So let's say if someone did a brain scan of Will's brain, maybe they'd go, "Oh my gosh, how ADHD is this person?" Edward Hallowell actually said to me, I got diagnosed by him in Massachusetts, and he said to me, "I can't believe you got out of 8th grade." I was like, "I know, school sucks, man. This is brutal," you know? But what I see with the labeling is it should, if we really believe that 1 in 38 people have autism, wouldn't we have a serious revisiting of schooling? Like a serious, like, what is the most important thing? Because it's gonna be socializing and being together and learning about ourselves. That's and going back to my nerding out about experiential, the reason it's experiential is it's the reflecting on experience. That's how you learn from experience. You don't just learn by not thinking about what you're doing. So you learn from really thinking about what happened, now what? So what? What does any of this mean? And we kind of are using these labels to say, "Now I understand you, but I can't change anything that I'm doing. Now it's all on you to change."
I was nodding and smiling as you were talking about your relationship with your ADHD because I also got diagnosed with ADHD in my 30s. By the time I already had a master's degree in a counseling practice and all these people coming to me, "I think I have ADHD," and they would tell me about it. I'm like, "Well." I guess we all do, or at least I do. And then I eventually was like, okay, I'll take a label. And, I went through the little honeymoon phase with the stimulants, and it's amazing for 5 minutes when your brain can hold 7 things in your working memory at once instead of two. That's a nice feeling. For me, the heart palpitations and insomnia aren't worth it. And so my lifestyle is very similar to yours. I have a life that works for the mind that I have, and I can get things done in bursts. I can hyper focus. I can pull something off in a few days that might take someone else months. But if I don't finish it all at once, it's gone forever. Like I've lost my hyper focus. Sorry, that idea did not make it to fruition. And this is why I'm afraid to let go sometimes when I'm working on a project, because I'm like, if I drop this project, it's just going to disappear. I can't pick it up 6 months later. So I completely relate to what you're saying. But at the same time, had I gotten labeled sooner, or let's say someone with a similar temperament and personality to myself, similar neurotype, to myself, existed in today's environment, would they be able to make it to this level of success? Would they be able to build that life? Because I think the current culture is a lot of using it for the excuse making, right? What you said is, what do we do with the diagnosis? What does that mean we need to do with our lives to, make up for our deficits, for example? And that's a much different mentality than the secondary gain mentality. Let me hide behind this diagnosis. Let me use it as an excuse to fail in the areas where I struggle. And what I wonder is, who is going to sit down with these young people and look them in the eyes and say to them, honestly, let's have a conversation about what you're afraid of. Because this might feel cute and pretty for now, this safety blanket that you're hiding under of, well, I have this disorder, so I can't do that. So don't expect it of me. And if you expect it of me, you're cruel, right? That might feel comforting for a while, but you will end up seriously uh, inhibited and behind in life in ways that are going to be really unpleasant to live with the consequences of. So, can we maybe help you face your fears, shame, inadequacy, fear of growing up, fear of responsibility? Can we help you face those one by one so that this label doesn't become an obstacle?
I could not agree more. And that's where we have to sit down with young people, especially when these terms are thrown around, and they're thrown around in this medicalized, like, fashion where there's no biopsy for these things. So, that's, like, sort of I remember doing the ADHD test, and I was like, "This is so boring." I was like, I'm pushing a button when a light turns on or something. I was like, "What am I doing here?" Like, and so there's no biopsy for these things. So these are sort of they're ideas of what's going on with your neurotype, as you said. And I think I and people like this is kind of funny because I'll talk about this with students, and you've experienced me for over an hour now. And I say, listen, if I get off topic, just raise your hand and say, Will, I don't follow. And then students will come up to me and they're like, you're my ADHD superhero. And I go, no, that's kind of like a trigger warning. That's not me saying, I'm telling you this is what I'll do because I know myself and I know how I'll act and what will happen, and I'll be impulsive. And I liked what you said about not finishing a project. On Friday, um, there was an argument on social media about wilderness therapy stuff, which I have researched about. And someone came at me about wilderness therapy and definitions. And my wife was at work. I was working at home. And she said, come to work with me and do some work in my office. I was like, sure. I went there and I wrote 3,000 words in like 3 hours of a peer reviewed paper. It's still open behind our thing. Haven't touched it. Like, I was like, that's boring. I was like, so my list of unfinished projects is very long as well. But I think if you're, let's go back to like autism, and socially, that you have some quirks that might make socializing difficult. I think the gift is to really lean into that, and then really lean into, how does this make you, I mean, so special and awesome? Like, how does this make you amazing? Like, and I think instead of observe, like we talked about this, like the oppression Olympics, instead of just bringing in more identifiers about, and I think it worked in the power way, like you said, it gets you out of things, you know? I think, and Nevin wrote about it, and I think for those to like, I think looking at things internationally is really interesting. That in North America, this is a far bigger phenomenon than say in Australia or other countries where I've been lucky to go. But like Nevin um, teaches he taught in the child and youth care department. He's in the faculty of health now. This is my co-author, and he also teaches education every now and then. And he had students with accommodation plans for no public speaking and no group projects. And he started saying to the students, how are you going to prepare yourself to run a classroom if you've never practiced public speaking? And so I'm not a very nervous public speaker, but I grew up playing music, so I'm used to being on a stage. But everybody should be nervous about public speaking. It's scary, you know? I'll watch this when this episode comes out and think, gosh, I should have said that more clearly. You know, like that's how that works. So I think being an adult that's present with, okay, now what? What are we going to do with this? And so then learning things like my wife knows that sometimes I'll come to bed at 1 a.m. because I've been working on a project. And she knows that I will sit in bed and be annoying, fidgeting if I don't write that project out. So knowing yourself is really important. And she also knows, like, if we're on a holiday, on vacation somewhere, she works in travel, so we're really lucky we get to travel a lot. Like, I do need a few hours to work every day, otherwise I'll never be present, you know? And it's like, if you know those things, we can be in a relationship where, like, she stinks at working from home. So I know when she comes home, I better put my work down and hang out with my wife, and then I can go back to work later. Like, having these knowing yourself is really important. If we're going to understand ourselves through these, these labels and terms.
Well, I think your wife and my husband might have a lot in common. I'm the same way. I mean, we could be on vacation. The first week of vacation is relaxing, but then the work impulse comes back, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I have to go write this down. I got the creative inspiration. We
Yeah.
also had a moment. I needed his help with something that was glitching on my computer the other day. And I pulled him in, and of course, his solution is you need to shut everything down and turn it, and he wanted me to close out all these programs, and
Oh
I
my
just about
gosh.
had a meltdown because I was
Yes.
like, "If I close all these windows, I'm never gonna remember the 5 projects I was working
Yes.
on."
Exactly.
But you talk about people using their anxiety or their whatever diagnosis as an excuse to get out of things, and you and I as mental health professionals know, and I think you did a good job of articulating this in the book, how incredibly counterproductive that is because these are the things that build your sense of identity. And it's just reinforcing that sense, I am someone who doesn't have the strength to do X, Y, or Z, right? And how are you ever going to build genuine confidence if you're constantly avoiding things? And then it feeds back into the cycle of anxiety.
Yeah, and it leads to, as well, and this is also in my head at the moment about this will really kill you. I was going to do a keynote at this conference about this very topic, and then the conference got canceled. So now I have this whole presentation in my head that I can't deliver, and so you're going to get a chunk of it here now. So,
You
but
should do it
one
on
of the
YouTube.
yeah, I thought about doing that. Yeah, but one of the things, like, I've been thinking about is it also leads to. This is going to sound like a leap, so bear with me and challenge me about this as well, please. It leads to this sort of institutionalizing of our thinking. And what I mean by that is I'll go to the university support, and I'm just talking about the university context, but I think it's the same in high school. I'm going to go and get this written down that I get 15 extra minutes per hour on an exam or something. Cool. We put it out there. And then there's this inherent assumption that I can't do the exam unless I have this. So then I'm back at the support services, who are all wonderful people doing their job, of course. And then it creates this cycle of being caught up instead of just thinking for yourself about things. And so it doesn't lead to this sort of intellectual freedom to do your own work, do your own thing, know who you are so that you can know when someone's pulling the rug out from under you. And so instead of this teacher is making fun of accommodations. What an asshole. I'm sitting there going, no, I do want you to be your best self. And if you need extra 15 minutes, you can just ask me. I'll give it to you. What do I care? You know, but when it's wrapped up in the label and the mental health terminology, and then it gets wrapped up in the system, on your medical charts, on these things, you're you can start to be doing yourself a disservice. And I see this a lot, especially being a social work educator, which is mostly a, you know, women dominated profession, and women in, coming back to university, usually in their 30s or 40s. It's usually a later career change. And when you were talking about your experience, there was many who said, I had the euphoria when I finally realized I have ADHD and this is how my brain works. And I'm going, great. Now you get to know yourself as a learner. And that gives you the freedom to know how to work, the way to construct your workplace, the way to take care of yourself if you're on vacation, the way to be in relationship with other people. And that is the real freedom of this. We're just the institutionalized, I get 15 more minutes. That's not really going to help you that much.
Are you a therapist in need of continuing education that's not over the top woke? Check out my colleague Lisa Mustard's pod courses. All of her pod courses are approved by the National Board for Certified Counselors. Right now, Lisa is offering my listeners an incredible deal. Get all 27 pod courses for only $44. That could meet almost all of your continuing education needs for the year. Visit lisamustard.com/podcourses and use code SOMETherapist to take $5 off of her $49 pod course bundle. Again, use code SOMETherapist at lisamustard.com/podcourses. I'll include that link and coupon in the show notes for your convenience. All right, now back to the show.
The leap I was going to make about being a psychotherapist is I was trained in solution focused. Loved it. It hit me at 20 years old, like, oh my gosh, why doesn't everybody do this? And then I started going to solution focused conferences and I saw the whole, you're not as solution focused as you're supposed to be. And I was like, okay, see y'all later. I'm done with this club. Like, I still like the ideas, but I was like, I don't need to be in that inner circle anymore. Like, they're bullies about what term. Did you ask the miracle question the right way? Why are you even talking about the diagnoses? Like I was like, oh, this is like a bullying club, you know? And then like wilderness therapy, same thing. I was like, hey, we should probably not kill kids. They were like, Will, you should stop talking about this. I'm like, okay, see y'all later. I'm out. You know, that getting out of that is the real freedom to be able to do whatever you want. So I think that sometimes there's this notion that this label is going to lead to something. And I think at first we see the euphoria of, oh my gosh, I get it. And I think just like you and I was talking about, now what? How if I learn how I learn, how can I do more learning in the style of learning that I want to do? Which I think is actually really individualistic and knowing who you are so you can bring your best self to a neurodiverse space.
In your section on borderline personality disorder, you said that even Marsha Linehan, who invented dialectical behavioral therapy for the treatment of borderline personality disorder, one of the most respected names in the field of treating BPD, even she said that she does not advise patients to tell their medical professionals that they have BPD because she knows that they will be discriminated against and that, their health concerns might not be taken seriously. And that is an example of being alert and thinking for yourself about what is in your best interest, regardless of what your hindrances might be, or maybe especially bearing in mind what your personal limitations might be. You know what it reminds me of? Did you see this clip that went viral this week of the guy talking about normies, psychos, and schizos?
No, I didn't see that. That's funny.
I loved it. And then I started seeing a lot of posts. Of course, this is how sensitive the algorithm is. I don't know. Like, maybe people were always talking about this, but because I liked and shared the video, now I'm seeing all the tweets about it. But, but there's a discourse that has been sparked about, here's this premise, right? That psychos benefit from the naivete of normies who don't know how to spot psychos because normies are normies and they project their normal, empathetic way of thinking onto other people, don't recognize the predatory, exploitative nature of psychos. Psychos are running the world, controlling the normies. And you know who gets a bad rap? Schizos. Schizos is a natural predator of psychos because they're just crazy enough to know what the psychos are up to, but they're not here to hurt the normies. They're here to protect the normies. So he basically, in a very colorful manner, makes this case. And now I'm seeing all these people saying, yeah, let's look out for our schizos. And and I
Yeah.
thought, I think I have just enough schizo in me to
Right.
appreciate what he's saying, because I can get a little, I have that little bit of conspiracy theorist edge to me. In fact, one of my favorite negative reviews of my podcast, like, if you're going to leave a negative review, at least make it entertaining.
Right.
So this one, the title of the review was "You Must Be Some Kind of Conspiracy Theorist." I was like, okay, well, at least be clever.
Yeah.
But one thing about the schizotypal mentality that he's referring to is that skepticism of the fact that there are people out there to exploit your weaknesses. And that's the real irony of all these young people who are so um they're making themselves so vulnerable with these labels in a
Totally.
number of ways. One is their fragile mentality, that they themselves do not believe that they can take the test in an hour. They don't believe that they can rise to the occasion. They believe they need all these accommodations. Um, but it's also that they're bearing themselves to the world saying, I have no self-esteem. I I think I need all this sympathy, and then just making it so easy for the predatory psychos of the world to present themselves and their agendas as the solution, when really they're just there to capitalize off of their weaknesses. So I think from a somewhat paranoid schizoid position, we
Yeah.
can actually make a case for even the young people with borderline personality disorder, as Marsha Linehan herself said, like, maybe not putting that on full display, maybe guarding your heart a little bit more.
100%. That's so well said, and I could not agree more. And it reminded me of, I chopped this from the introduction, but I might write a Substack about this experience. When I was doing my Bachelor of Social Work degree, I was working at all of these wilderness therapy programs because I just love the outdoors. I love the therapy stuff. I was just learning. I would go anywhere. I'd even volunteer. And my serious girlfriend at the time, that relationship died because of work, because I was like, I need to go outside and be camping and stuff. And when I had to do my internship, my first internship was at a um, a clinic for adults with severe and persistent mental illness. Now, I had no desire to work with adults or severe and persistent mental illness. I was adolescents in the outdoors the whole time. And I got to this place. It was in a strip mall next to a thrift shop and a 7-Eleven out in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And I got there. I had to pick up. I'd get there, get this 18-seater van, drive to the supportive living facility, which was about 10 minutes down the road, pick up all of these adults with schizophrenia, antisocial person, everything under the sun. And then we come back and then we do day programs together. It's kind of like babysitting adults. I do group therapy about your medications, like group,
I had the
psychoeducation.
same job.
Okay. Yeah.
We've had
I
the same life.
Yeah, that's so cool. I loved it. I thought I would hate it. There was an exercise program that when I got there, and the exercise program was we had to do exercise like 3 times a week, but it was the person before me just took them to the mall, like to a Westfield shopping mall, and they all just sat in the food court. I was like, we're going to go to the Potomac River and walk. Like, we're going to go walk along the towpath along the canal. And they're like, is this risky? I was like, no, donkeys walked the towpath to build Washington, D.C. We will be okay. So we're finding turtles and doing all of these fun things. It was a blast. And one day, one of the clients didn't show up. He was one who came on his own, didn't get in the van with me. He didn't show up. And the boss comes in and she goes, oh, that person, he's taking part in a clinical trial. And I said, okay. And I looked through his file. This was like his 20th clinical trial, right? And then I looked at how did he get involved in this clinical? Like, he was here yesterday. Like, what changed from yesterday to today? And I looked in it, and the service that we were providing, we were billing state funding every day. So our notes to get our funding. And I'm obviously a free worker from the university. We were owned by a pharmaceutical company who also owned the supported living facility. So I started looking at everyone's file, And everyone had been in multiple clinical trials. So there was no actual agenda for us to help people. So where were we? We're in Montgomery County, Maryland, where NIH is. So we're bankrolling $1 million studies for new medications for schizophrenia. No desire. So there's no mention in these studies. These are the same 20 people that we did our study on last year with the same 20 people. So there's actually this, who gets better if they go right back to adult daycare with supported living? And so I started going, what the hell is going on? And so I left there going, I loved being around those people and I hated the institution that I was supporting. And when I left, started working in Australia, my wife's Australian, so I started going to Australia. And I looked back at my work in wilderness therapy. I started going, how is nobody talking about like the forced kidnapping of children? Like, this is why Paris Hilton endorsed our book. Like, because Neva and I started writing out and going, actually, the researchers are all funded by the industry, and they've never admitted anything critical about this kind of, very involuntary practice and this institutionalizing of children. And I was just like, how is no? So I think very much we do need to support the people that are calling people out. And we use this video. I don't know if you've seen this one about being the first follower of somebody. Like, that's more important to building a movement than being the lone voice. That the best thing we can do is support the people that we think are raising the alarm as well, the schizos, as you'd say. So I think very early in my career, I started, and growing up in like a punk rock community, it was always about calling
Same.
things out. Yes, always about calling things out. And so I was just like, what? Hey, social work degree, my teachers, why are we not doing something about, like, these are the most vulnerable people like in the world, and why are we okay with them just being rats in clinical trials? And while these researchers get super rich off all this funding, you know? And then this is the part like where my mom and I, we love politics and we argue about it all the time. When the current administration like removes some funding for NIH, I go, well, they've gotten away with a lot of dodgy shit, people. Like, and that's not the way I lean politically, but I was like, like, also, if you really knew this, there's a lot of icky here, like in how these ideas come to, fruition. Like, I mean, we wrote about the history of Ritalin. Like, that was a chemist coming up with synthesized methylphenidate to test it on his wife so she could lose weight and focus on her tennis a bit more. Her name was Marguerite, so he called it the Ritaline. Ritalin, Adderall was the name of Adderall. It was a weight loss drug. Obliterol, and I think that was what it's called. And then the guy who bought it hired a marketing team who said ADD for all, Adderall. Like, he's like, he thought it was inclusive language. And it's like, some of these ideas don't come from laboratories of ethics, And so I'm with you. We've got to support the people who are calling things out.
So what you're saying is you're a schizo too.
Yes.
Yeah, nothing quite like that club of us schizos who are just smart enough to pass for normies whenever we want to. Like, we're the most dangerous people in the world, but we use our powers for good.
Yeah.
So you were talking about wilderness therapy, taking people outdoors. There's a chapter later in your book where you talk about the shortage of experience. And I think earlier in the interview, I was hearing you referring to that as well. Like when we were talking about how schools are really lacking in the types of experiences that they allow kids to learn from, for example. So I'd like to bring it home for especially the parents in the audience right now, because this is something I noticed them struggling with too. I talk to a lot of parents who are fortunately affluent and well-intentioned enough to be able to afford their kids lots of extracurriculars, but they're still like experience gets confined to these extracurricular spaces. And you and I grew up punk rock kids, so our experiences were not confined to the to the safe extracurriculars, right? We were in the mosh pit, we were at protest. Not to say that those are the best experiences to have, but what types of experiences do we want to support young people having, and what do we need to do as a society, and what can parents do to support those developmentally appropriate experiences?
The book is kind of outlined where we interviewed different sort of experts in the field. And we interviewed Ellen Beat Hansen Sandcedar for this chapter, The Extinction of Experience. And Ellen is like in Scandinavia. She's in Norway. She's like the foremost researcher on risky play and rough and tumble play. And Nevin actually on Nevin Harper, my co-author, on his Substack, he re-interviewed her recently. And she said some things I wish she had said when we talked to her for the book as well. But one of the things is there can be a bit too much instruction, and kids need to play and roughhouse. So rough and tumble play in Norway, they're actually starting to prescribe children that come to the clinics that say, I might be autistic. It's like, okay, well, let's get you and go do some rough and tumble play. And also the great thing of rough and tumble play is if you want your kids to learn about consent, they will sort this out. They will learn what stop means, and no, I don't want to roughhouse anymore. But what happens, and Ellen talked to Nevin about this project she did like 20 years ago where she was doing whittling activities with young people that were in a jail, in an incarcerated facility, right? And she said the jail was so scared of giving these kids knives, right? And she said, don't worry, it will be okay. And they're doing something, and one might get a cut. And at the end of the study that she was doing, they said, yeah, I learned how to better use a knife. Like, I know the mistake I made. This and that. So really, what we tend to do is jump to the worst possible thing that could happen. And what that does is it makes us go, let's not give that a try. But the other thing that happens is when we're on the sidelines, let's say you're watching your kid climb a tree, right? They might fall out of that tree. That's the risk they're taking, right? The second you go, watch out for that branch, you've actually distracted your kid from the thing that they're doing. Now they're climbing a tree and worrying about your anxiety. So one thing that's really helpful, I found this as someone who I've never been a dog owner before, and we got a bulldog 10 years ago. And I'll tell you, I knew nothing about dogs. My wife had never had a dog. And sometimes me being around people that have had dogs really lowers my anxiety. Why is he eating grass? Will, it's okay. I go, okay. He's doing dog things. Is he sick? Is his allergies as bad as before? He's okay. And so I learned a lot from being around other adults. What has happened in the Western world in our communities is we often live in places where we don't know our neighbors and we don't have time with our kids with other adults around. So even this notion of a play date, I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood where we just went to the park and saw what kids are there. And so that has really changed. This is something that's really changed for kids where they don't see you with other adults as often as before. So one of the things you can do is just set up times where your kids can be with other kids without you involved. And yes, something bad might happen, but at what cost is it taking this away and having this safety? And this, I think, being from Washington, D.C., I will say, one of the most amazing things that happened, and this is sort of context that me as I like writing about this stuff too and doing presentations about it. In the 80s, DC was the murder capital of the country, right? This is a bit before my time. I was just a baby in the 80s. So it was the murder capital of the country, but simultaneously one of the best youth-driven DIY punk music scenes emerged with Fugazi, Minor Threat, Bad Brains, Teen Idols, Rites of Spring, these amazing bands. What happened at the time, and many of these were, some of them like Ian MacKaye, they were like private school kids at Georgetown Day School, but they wanted to play music. And they had some values about that. They thought every show should be all ages, but the reason this movement really grew was really because venues would open their doors on the weekends during the daytime. So everything was a matinee show, right? So they'd close the bar and say, all these kids can come roughhouse, right, in this venue. Now, if you look at pictures of, like you said, of punk shows, it looks violent, right? It looks like here's the scum of the earth roughhousing together. Now, that movement was, you have Bad Brains, so you have a predominantly, you have a black punk band that is in this predominantly white genre of music. You had people from all walks of life. It was a very woman-driven scene at the time as well. There's great journalism books about the women of punk rock in Washington, D.C. They're amazing. So you had this entire movement that was actually designed about giving kids a safe place to do things that we don't like the look of as long as they're home before dark. So the adults kind of left them alone. But the parents were terrified. It was the murder capital of the world, of America, you know? And then what you had simultaneously is you have Ian MacKaye writing about, you know, being straight edge, and that became its own kind of annoying movement too, as well. But being straight edge, also PETA is getting very popular. So then you have veganism in the punk scene, right? All these things were inspired by this amazing movement of leaving the kids alone. Now, what's really funny about that, we remember, like, speaking of conspiracy, what's really funny, like the Pizzagate, the story about like Hillary Clinton and you know, eating babies at Comet Pizza. Comet Pizza is one of those venues. I've played punk shows at Comet Pizza. You know, it's an amazing. It's got ping pong and shitty pizza, and pizza's okay. And then they let kids play punk music. Any band that wants it. It's an amazing story of when you leave the kids alone, they usually really sort it out, right? And I see this as also as an ice hockey player. If I go to the rink and a 5-year-old shows up for, you know, a pickup game of ice hockey, everyone goes, cool. And the kid can play and play with people that are better than them, worse than them. And so everyone's kind of in it together. And I think that is the sort of thing. I think as I finished writing Kids These Days, my head was in this place of democracy and participation. What have we given kids to participate? And I think the punk community is a really great one, because what do we want to do? We're going there to express ourselves and to roughhouse. And maybe that's something developmentally many of us need. Maybe a good mosh pit could save your life. Who knows?
That's a great quote.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, let kids play, and I mean, gosh, I scared the daylights out of my mother with the things I did as a teen, and to be fair, they were very scary. They would have been very scary for any parent, and now when parents join my course, in one of my introductory videos, it's like, "Welcome to the course." I'm like, "Here's my personal background and why I'm uniquely suited to operate at this intersection of, you know, helping my Gen X and Boomer clients understand their Gen Z and Alpha kids. As this elder millennial, I consider myself honorary Gen Z,
Yeah.
or excuse me, honorary Gen X, because I'm
Yeah.
married into Gen X. I was
Yeah.
thinking as you were talking about how you were talking about climbing trees, like my husband, Gen X, we saw some parent shouting at a kid in a tree the other day, and he was like, "When I was growing up, I could be in a tree for 2 hours before anybody noticed I was in a tree."
Yeah. I used to crawl in the
So,
sewers. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I did some really, really risky stuff as a teenager, and I'm not saying that it was the smartest, but I survived, and I developed, like, a thick skin despite being a sensitive soul, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Let's close on one more of your hopeful messages for, parents and others who are worried about the younger generation.
So I know that we started this with what are you going to notice? And I when I came to Australia, I started a small nonprofit, doing outdoor expeditions with kids and normal private practice stuff. And I used it as like my laboratory to test out things that I was thinking about. And one of the things we did, we built this parenting. It was while we were out on expeditions for 14 days, the parents had a short 10-minute webinar that they got every day, and a workbook that went along with our program, and then stuff for them to do. And before we went on the expedition, I had a call with each of the families, with the parents, and I said, "Listen, us therapy people, we might have doctor on in front of our name or MSW after it, right? We've studied a lot, but we can also get in the weeds on the wrong stuff. Like, we can get stuck in our own head and thinking what's important. And I just need to know, before I take this kid basically camping and hiking and canoeing and doing all this fun stuff for 14 days, what are the things you do not want me to change about your child?" And I didn't really care what they said. I just wanted them to think about it. And I think many of us know that despite how, divided the world seems and how frustrating technology is and how, invasive mental health concepts are, that if we pause and actually look at what these kids have been through, COVID, all of these things, they did kind of get on with it for the most part. And there's kids that are in families that are really struggling. And I want them to know that people we know we can see that struggle. And when I'm talking to parents, I want them to know that I hear their concerns. I also want to know the other side of the story. So for every tale of hardship and difficulty, there is a story of survival in there. And I want to know why you keep going. What made you pick up the phone and find, because your child's not going to Google Will Dobud and say, "Hey, mom, send me to go see this guy." Um, that if we pay attention to how we notice things, it can be really good. And the example, I think I took this out of the book, but like if Renee and I have had an argument, it's tempting to make that argument go on like, "Oh, she's so wrong." And then she's sitting there, "Why is he chewing with his mouth open? How annoying is he?" Instead of going, "I get to live with my best friend." And that is gonna involve arguing, and it's gonna involve being annoying, but what a treat. I think that about my young adult children who, I'm trying to be like, "Hey, move out." And then I'm like, "I'm gonna miss this when they move out." And they're amazing kids. Like, they're incredible. And I'm just like, yeah, they are really annoying, but at the same time, this is actually really precious time. How great is this? So, it's okay to be like, the kids are annoying. Every adult has said it, so it must just be adult phenomenon. I know you read when you read the book, like we trace this back to Socrates whinging about the kids. That's before Christ, 400 years before Christ. And he's saying these kids are disrespectful to adults. They're lazy. Going into the early 1900s, everybody was scared of advanced locomotion. Outward Bound was founded on this idea that kids are out of shape and lazy because of advanced locomotion. That was the 1930s. So it's good to go. It's okay to complain about modern times. We have only lived in modern times. Every time is modern to what you live in. But also notice that those kids are also adapting to the modern times, usually pretty okay, and some are really struggling, and that's important to notice that and listen and hear it out, but also to notice the things that are great. And you can find more of those great things by doing things together, having dinner together as a family, those sort of things, and having great conversations.
Well, I think that's a fabulous note to end on. Will Dobud, thank you so much for joining us. So, everyone, his book, I'm going to hold it up to the screen if you are watching on YouTube. Kids These Days, Understanding and Supporting Youth Mental Health by Will Dobud and Nevin Harper. People can find this everywhere books are found.
Yep. Maybe
And where
in
else?
store in your nice book, nice independent bookstore if you wanted to support your bookstore. But yeah, anywhere, Amazon, anywhere you buy your books.
Where else can people find you?
I'm pretty open book. So, and my name is really simple to find me. So, any of the social media platforms, I try to be active on that when it's not soul destroying. And willdobud.com, you can get in touch with me. And anyway, I just the coolest thing about doing this book and drifting away from the outdoor therapy field in as far as academic writing was just meeting new people. So I love people getting in touch and being in contact. And I really appreciate the time with you and your awesome podcast that you've grown, which is so amazing. So
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it.
And are you seeing patients?
I keep a small practice here in Adelaide. I'm still trying to find COVID really crushed our nonprofit. And I was lucky that I simultaneously got offered full-time work at a university. So I'm hoping that we can bring that full nonprofit back. But I have consultation and do tons of different things. I keep my feet in every door so I don't become a stale, crusty academic who hasn't seen a client in 20 years. So, which is far more common than we think, which is terrifying. But no, yeah. So keep a small practice, and I just want to get back to expedition work because that's me at my best. So
Oh, that sounds
Yeah,
so fun. Wish
so
I was
fun.
on a kayak in Australia right now.
Yes, that's right. Well, we're in the, oddly enough, I don't know when this will come out, but we've just had like 2.5 weeks of over 100 degrees. So there's been nothing good about going outside. Brutal. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist. If you enjoyed this episode, kindly take a moment to rate, review, share, or comment on it using your platform of choice. And of course, please remember, podcasts are not therapy, and I'm not your therapist. Special thanks to Joey Pecoraro for this awesome theme song, Half Awake, and to Pods by Nick for production. For help navigating the impact of the gender craze on your family, be sure to check out my program for parents, ROGD Repair. Any resource you heard mentioned on this show, plus how to get in touch with me, can all be found in the notes and links below. Rain or shine, I hope you will step outside to breathe the air today. In the words of Max Ehrmann, with all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world.